Committee will please come to order. Today the committee is meeting to consider 4 bills: H.R. 2994, the Satellite Home Viewer Reauthorization Act; H.R. 1147, the Local Community Radio Act; H.R. 3633, the Public Safety Interoperable Communications Grant Program Extension Act; and H.R. 3792, the Ryan White HIV/AIDS Treatment Extension Act. The first bill we will be considering, H.R. 2994, the Satellite Home Viewer Reauthorization Act, or SHVERA. SHVERA grew out of the competing policy goals of promoting competition for pay television service and protecting our nationwide system of free local over-the-air broadcast television. I'm pleased that this bill strikes the proper balance between these competing policy goals, notably for the first time ever, thanks to incentives included in H.R. 2994 and the Judiciary Committee's portion of this bill, we may be able to provide satellite service to all 210 television markets, including highly rural areas. The committee started its work on this bill in February, and since that time it has gone forward in a uniquely bipartisan manner. I would like to thank Chairman Boucher for his leadership in this effort. As a member of both the Commerce Committee and the Judiciary Committee, Chairman Boucher's expertise has been instrumental in moving this bill towards the House floor. Mr. Boucher's subcommittee counsel, Amy Levine, also deserves high praise for her efforts and knowledge of this arcane area of the law. And I'd also like to thank Tim Powderly of the committee staff for his tireless effort. Ranking Member Stearns and his staff, particularly Neil Freed, also deserve thanks for their hard work in bringing this bill forward. This could not be processed through the subcommittee, and now the committee without their this could not have been processed through the subcommittee, and now the committee without their dedication and expertise. And finally, I'd like to thank the National Association of Broadcasters, DirecTV, and Dish Network for their contributions to this effort. A bill of this complexity involves a balancing of issues involving content creation, technology, diversity, and competition. This cannot be written without the cooperation of all affected interests in order to serve the larger public interest. We look forward to continuing to work with the satellite and broadcast industries as we resolve outstanding issues while this bill moves towards consideration by the House. Chairman Boucher will be offering a bipartisan manager's amendment in the nature of a substitute that makes a number of changes to H.R. 2994, which he will explain in more detail upon introduction. We will also consider H.R. 1147, the Local Community Radio Act. As a longtime advocate of expanding low-power FM radio services and the dynamic contribution they make to localism, a bedrock of our communications law, I'm pleased that the committee is acting on this important bipartisan measure. I would like to recognize Mr. Doyle and Mr. Terry for their leadership on this issue and thank National Public Radio for working with the committee in a constructive manner to strengthen the interference protection measures contained in the bill. Our final communications-related measure is H.R. 3633, the Public Safety Interoperable Communications Grant Program Extension Act, introduced by Representative Harman. This bill has strong bipartisan support as well as the enthusiastic endorsement of leading public safety organizations, the National Governors Association, and several public safety officials, including the City of Los Angeles. The PSIC grant program funds state projects that will provide public safety personnel with interoperable communications equipment and training for system users. Given the enormous importance of interoperable public safety communications during a time of crisis, we need to allow states the time and funds necessary to complete projected projects already underway or in planning stages. If adopted, Representative Harman's legislation will provide the necessary time. With regard to health legislation before us today, Chairman Pallone, Ranking Member Deal, Ranking Member Barton, and I have worked in a bipartisan and bicameral fashion to present the health-related legislation before you today. H.R. 3792, the Ryan White HIV/AIDS Extension Act of 2009. This program has been serving people living with HIV/AIDS for nearly 20 years. It provides care, treatment, support services to nearly 500,000 people. After our hearing last month, we came together with our Senate colleagues to find common grounds to ensure this program could continue uninterrupted. To reach consensus, we all had to compromise. Because this bill reflects that approach, it doesn't contain all of the provisions I'd like to see. However, I believe we've arrived at good, solid positions that will strengthen the Ryan White program for the next 4 years. Well, I urge my colleagues to support each of these bipartisan measures and look forward to further discussion of them during today's markup. I want to recognize members for opening statements, and particularly the chairman and ranking members of the subcommittees involved, the two subcommittees involved. And we'll hear from Mr. Barton when he arrives, but I want to recognize Mr. Stearns, the ranking member of the Communications Subcommittee.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, we're considering 3 bills that came through the Communications Technology and the Internet Subcommittee. All 3 bills are products of strong bipartisan cooperation, which is accommodation to its chairman, Mr. Boucher, for his leadership and his willingness to work in a bipartisan manner, and I commend him for it. The first bill, as mentioned, H.R. 2994, the Satellite Home Viewer Reauthorization Act. This bill modifies and improves the Satellite Home Viewer Act to make it more consumer-friendly. Some of the concerns that have been raised at the subcommittee markup have been addressed in the substitute which will be offered. This is a good bill. I urge my colleagues to support it. The original satellite legislation in 1988 is credited with fostering the incredibly competitive video marketplace that we have today, which benefits all the consumers. The bill extends for another 5 years the authority of satellite operators to provide the signals of out-of-market stations to subscribers who cannot receive their local stations over the air. In addition, the bill makes clerical and substantive changes to the statute to reflect the end of analog broadcasting. In particular, it directs the FCC to update for digital broadcasting both the predictive model and on-location testing rules for determining whether a subscriber is eligible for a distant signal. The bill also rectifies the FCC's implementation of the, quote, significantly viewed, end quote, provisions. These provisions added to the statute 5 years ago allow a satellite operator to provide subscribers in a local market with signals from a network affiliate in a nearby market if that nearby affiliate is watched over the air by a significant number of consumers that are in that local market. The statute prohibited a satellite operator, however, from carrying the significantly viewed affiliate in high-definition format if it didn't also carry the local affiliate of the same network in high-definition format. The FCC construed that provision to provide a carriage of the significantly viewed affiliate in high definition at any moment of the day that the local station was not broadcasting in this high definition. Because satellite operators find it infeasible to match the transmission formats of the two stations moment by moment, they usually choose not to carry the significantly viewed stations at all. To address that, the bill makes clear that a satellite operator may carry this viewed affiliate in high definition when the local affiliate is not broadcasting in high definition. So as long as the satellite operator does carry the local affiliate in high definition when it is available in that format. We must clear existing regulatory obstacles rather than create a whole new set of rules. As I've already mentioned, the video market is robustly competitive. In that environment, there should be less interference in the market, not more. This bill starts to do this, and I urge its adoption. My colleagues, the second bill under consideration is H.R. 1147, the Local Community Radio Act. The FCC created the low-power FM service in 2000 to promote local broadcasting and programming. At the end of 2000, Congress restricted how close low-power stations may operate to a full-power station due to interference concerns. As a result, fewer low-power stations can be authorized. This bill would repeal the statutory limits. I have some questions about the impact on full-power FM stations and the issue of interference, but many of these issues have been addressed so I urge its passage. And thirdly, we'll consider H.R. 3633, the Public Safety Interoperable Communications Grant Program Extension Act. As has been discussed in the past, the DTV Act authorizes NTIA, in consultation with DHS, to make payments of up to $1 billion by September 30th, 2010, to carry out the Public Safety Interoperable Communications Grant Program. The program helps public safety agencies acquire, deploy, and train for the use of interoperable communication systems that can utilize reallocated public safety spectrum in the 700 megahertz band. The PSIC program has awarded most of the money and approved over 300 investments to fund projects in all 50 states and U.S. territories. However, in a report required by Congress, the Department of Commerce's Office of Inspector General found that states need additional time to comply with the program requirements. This bill would simply allow funds to remain available for up to 2 years and would extend the performance period by up to 2 years. So, my colleagues, I also urge its passage. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I look forward to continuing to work with you and obviously Mr. Boucher and his leadership in bipartisan performance. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Stearns. The Chair is now pleased to recognize the Chairman of the subcommittee that has produced 3 of the 4 bills before us and has done an outstanding job in doing so. Mr. Boucher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your scheduling this markup in such a timely way this morning. This morning, our committee considers 3 measures that have been reported from the Communications Subcommittee, and I want to express my appreciation to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Stearns from Florida, and his very fine professional staff member, Neil Freed, both of whom worked very closely with Amy Levine, our professional staff member on the subcommittee, and with me as these measures were considered. In fact, the process we undertook at subcommittee on each of these measures was fully bipartisan, and I want to commend all of the members who took part in our conversations on both sides of the aisle for that outstanding effort. The first measure that we're marking up this morning is the Satellite Home Viewer Act revisions. That law was first passed in 1988 and has been successively revised upon its expiration each 5 years since that period of time. The basic law was adopted in 1988 to allow the importation of distant network signals into homes that cannot receive over the air a network signal from a local television affiliate of that particular network. It has generally worked well and deserves reauthorization, and our measure this morning is designed to continue that feature in the law. Key provisions of that law expire at the end of this year, and therefore passing this reauthorization in the near time frame is a necessity. We've taken the opportunity of legislating on this subject in order to achieve what, for me, has been a long-held goal, and I know it's a long-held goal for many rural residents today who cannot receive local television signals delivered by satellite, because in 28 local television markets around the United States, neither of the 2 principal carriers of satellite-delivered television, EchoStar and DirecTV, currently uplink those local television signals. We have 210 television markets across the country, and given commitments that have been made by one of the major carriers, by EchoStar, in a commitment letter sent to me earlier this year, and with provisions that are contained in the legislation we're considering this morning, the result will be that in the near time frame, all 210 local television markets will receive local into-local television service, and that truly is a major step forward. I want to commend today EchoStar for making a very generous offer in that commitment letter earlier this year, that if EchoStar receives the permission in this statute in order to import distant network signals, which it's now barred by law from doing, into those markets where there is not a full complement of network affiliates present within that market, in order to fill those gaps and serve those short markets with all the major networks that EchoStar would, in the very near time frame, probably within the year 2010, serve all 210 local television markets across the country. That is a very generous offer, and I want to express appreciation for it. As a result of that commitment and the provisions we have in this legislation, local television news, sports, weather, and essential emergency information will soon be available to satellite subscribers in every market in the nation. As the negotiations on this matter proceeded, the broadcasters and DirecTV also played a highly constructive role, and I want to commend all of the stakeholders for the good faith efforts and the successful negotiations that have led to this landmark achievement. Today, the committee also considers the Local Community Radio Act, patroned by our Pennsylvania colleague, Mr. Doyle, which will lead to the award of significantly more low-power radio licenses, enabling broader coverage of local matters of public interest, under an agreement that has been reached between the proponents of more low-power radio licenses and public radio stations. Special consideration must be given to the translator facilities that are so commonly used by public radio stations in order to propagate their signals across very broad geographic areas. Those translator stations typically receive a fairly weak signal from the main transmitter, and it's particularly important that there not be interference from low-power radio or from other sources of interference in the area immediately surrounding those translator facilities. And under the terms of a negotiated agreement contained in the legislation we're marking up this morning, that special consideration for those translator facilities will be provided. I want to commend Mr. Doyle for his fine work in bringing the matter before the committee. And I also, briefly, Mr. Chairman, want to commend our colleague, Ms. Harmon, and also our colleague, Mr. Gao from Louisiana, for their sponsorship of the third bill that we're marking up today, which is a measure to enable funding for the Interoperable Emergency Communications Grant Program to remain available until those funds are expended through fiscal year 2012. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boucher. Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for marking up these series of bills. We think that they are going to be reported on a bipartisan basis. I want to thank you and the other members on the majority side for working with us on the minority to reach consensus on these bills. The first bill is the Satellite Home Viewer Reauthorization Act, which is very timely in light of the highly successful DTV transition which just occurred. The current law lets satellite operators provide distant broadcast signals to subscribers who can't get local signals over the air. That authority, as you know, expires this year on December the 31st. The bill before us would extend it for 5 more years. The bill would also require the FCC to update how it determines if a subscriber can get an adequate signal over the air. Today's rules are based on analog signal strength, which is 0 in a world without analog broadcasting. The satellite television provisions are among the most complex that we deal with in the telecommunications law, and I'm pleased that members on both sides and their staffs have agreed to work in a bipartisan way to reauthorize this piece of legislation. We also are going to consider H.R. 1147, the Local Community Radio Act, which was introduced by Mr. Terry and Mr. Doyle. That bill was passed unanimously by voice in the subcommittee last week. It would repeal the statutory limits on how close low-power FM stations may operate to a full-power station based on an FCC recommendation that there would not be interference. Last week, the subcommittee also unanimously passed H.R. 3633, the Public Safety Interoperable Communications Grant Program Extension Act of 2009. The PSIC program is supposed to ensure that our nation's first responders have state-of-the-art communications equipment to effectively communicate with others in times of disaster. Without an extension, this effort will fall short because many states will be left with incomplete and partially funded projects. Congresswoman Harman on the majority side, Congressman Kao, who is not a member of this committee, on the minority side, are the two primary co-sponsors of this legislation. Finally, we are also reporting out of the full committee the reauthorization of the Ryan White CARE Act, which I'm a proud co-sponsor of, and which we just reported out of subcommittee yesterday afternoon on a bipartisan basis. I'm not going to repeat all the remarks about the Ryan White bill, since we did that at subcommittee yesterday. Suffice it to say, the program is important for providing care to people affected by HIV and AIDS. This reauthorization makes several improvements related to case reporting's hold harmless provisions with fair modifications, flexibilities to grantees using funding, realistic testing goals, and communications with emergency responders. I want to thank Congressman Pallone on the majority side, Congressman Deal and Congresswoman Bono on the minority side for working to make this bill bipartisan and to help clear it through both houses as quickly as possible. With that, Mr. Chairman, we look forward to the markup and we yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barton. The Chair now recognizes the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Health, Mr. Pallone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Barton, as well. Let me begin by recognizing the important role that Chairman Waxman played in the Ryan White program since its inception. He and his staff have been at the forefront in making sure people infected with HIV/AIDS can access the treatment and services they need to stay alive. And our actions today will make sure that this critical program continues to serve those in need. Mr. Chairman, HIV/AIDS impacts almost every corner of this nation. It does not matter what part of the country you come from or who you are. And for the past 20 years, the Ryan White program has been there to provide the resources necessary for communities across the country to respond to this epidemic and provide life-saving treatment for those who are infected. As modern medicine and science continues to evolve and we discover more breakthroughs, people with HIV/AIDS are living longer and healthier lives. But continuing to provide these life-saving treatment comes with a price tag that we must absolutely find a way to afford. The fact that a diagnosis of HIV/AIDS no longer means a death sentence means we have to make sure every American infected by this virus has an opportunity to access the medications he or she needs to stay alive. And that's why I'm happy that the bill we're marking up today increases the funding levels for the Ryan White program, so that perhaps with this increase in funding, fewer people will have to be told to wait to get the medicine or medical treatment they need to stay healthy. My hope is that one day no one will have to wait, either because enough funding is made available to provide treatment to everyone who needs it, or that one day there will simply be a vaccine or a cure discovered that will stamp out this disease. But until that day comes, Mr. Chairman, we must continue this critical program and make sure that it has adequate funding, and so I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this bicameral, bipartisan bill, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pallone. Without objection, all members will have an opportunity to submit an opening statement for the record. I would like to recognize members who, however, who wish to give an opening statement today to speak for 1 minute. Before we do that, Mr. Deal is the ranking member of the subcommittee, and I want to recognize him for 5 minutes on the legislation that his subcommittee produced, and any other comments he wishes to make on the bills before us. Mr. Deal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding the markup, and also want to thank you for the work that was done on the reauthorization of the Satellite Home Viewers Act. This was a bipartisan effort, and I am appreciative of the fact that Chairman Waxman and Chairman Boucher and their staffs were willing to work with me and to include some language that I suggested in this bill. I truly appreciate that. I think we can all appreciate the importance of this bill, as every 5 years it defines the rules by which the citizens of our country receive access to information by satellite, creating an informed and connected society. But I am concerned about this issue of keeping our citizens informed. As you're all aware, there are nearly 100 DMAs in 43 states with orphaned counties, in which the residents of these counties' principal source of news, sports, politics, and weather is from a major city not within their state. While many of us have long been aware of the problems associated with our constituents receiving non-in-state programming, the recent Senate judiciary markup of this bill, as well as the Senate Commerce hearings, has directed more attention to the fact that many members on both sides of the aisle and within both chambers are feeling the sense of urgency to fix this problem. I find it regrettable that the committee was unable to finally fix the problem of orphan county DMAs, as this is a problem which I think will get worse as more and more citizens speak up to their elected officials to let them know the extent by which their choice as consumers has been limited because they do not have access to local programming within their own state. Eventually, consumer choice and free market practices will lead this industry. It is my belief that my language, which is contained in this bill, will help us progress in that direction. Hopefully, in the future, this committee and those that have jurisdiction over all video programming issues will allow consumers the choices which they demand. I'm also pleased, though, that this committee will be considering H.R. 3792, a bill to reauthorize the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program. As I said during the subcommittee markup yesterday, I appreciate the bipartisan spirit in which the process of reauthorizing this bill took place, as well as the critical input of the HIV/AIDS community in helping to reach this bipartisan, bicameral compromise. And I urge all members to join me in supporting H.R. 3792. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Deal. Before recognizing members for 1 minute opening statements, I want to recognize the Chairman Emeritus of our committee, Mr. Dingell, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you. This is an important meeting of the committee. As the full committee considers H.R. 2994, the Satellite Home Viewer Reauthorization Act, I want to express my appreciation to the considerable work done by all parties to reach agreement on major portions of the bill. At the same time, I do have reservations about the language in Section 6 of the bill that grandfathers certain distant signal subscribers, which I believe may serve as a disincentive to local broadcasters to offer additional programming in some markets. It's my hope that we will continue to work with all the affected parties before the House considers this measure, so as to ensure that the burden of digital transition is shared fairly, and furthermore that satellite carriers are encouraged to the greatest extent possible to extend local into local satellite service across the country. This in mind, I intend to vote to support the manager's amendment to H.R. 2994 as well as the underlying bill. With respect to H.R. 1147, the Local Community Radio Act of 2009, although I continue to maintain a modest degree of skepticism and indeed apprehension concerning low-powered FM radio interference with high-powered broadcasts, I nevertheless feel this bill, as amended by the Subcommittee on Communications Technology and Internet, is fundamentally sound and will therefore support it. I note that I offer my support in large part because of my great affection and respect for its author, my dear friend from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, who is most persuasive on this matter. Moreover, I wish to commend my friend and colleague from California, Ms. Harmon, for her very fine work on H.R. 3633, which will extend the Public Safety Interoperable Communications Grant Program for a period of up to 2 years. This is a common-sense bill and will ensure better and more coordinated public safety communication. I am a co-sponsor of the legislation and urge my colleagues to support it as I intend to. Finally, I applaud you, Mr. Chairman Waxman and Chairman Pallone, as well as ranking members Barton and Deal, for working out a bipartisan deal to ensure the Ryan White's AIDS program is reauthorized. The bipartisan effort and coordination made with the Senate makes our jobs easier, and I fully believe we will act swiftly to ensure the future viability of this valuable program. Since 1990, the Ryan White program has been one of the most important pieces of our domestic response to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. This important program is essential to protecting our citizens living with HIV/AIDS and look forward to moving this bill forward. I thank you for your courtesy, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Dingell. Ms. Bonomack, do you wish to make an opening statement? No. Mr. Walden?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to comment on Section 8. and this study that's being proposed, that I certainly hope that it is done in a way that does not tilt the outcome one way or another and is actually fair and balanced. And also, I want to make sure that the Section 8 regulations don't stand in the way of private negotiations over retransmission programming agreements. And so I hope we can continue to work in these areas as this bill moves forward, and that the report to Congress concerning the ability of consumers to access in-state programming, the use of DMA system to find local markets for the purpose of receiving in-state programming is done in a fair way. So I just want to put that on the record, and I'll look forward to continue to working with you and Mr. Boucher and others on this issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walden. Ms. Eshoo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your continuing efforts to move significant legislation to full committee markup. This telecommunications legislation needs to be passed at light speed if we intend to keep up with market and industry developments, and I think that light speed is also necessary relative to the Ryan White CARE Act, because the reauthorization is so essential to ensure the resources for individuals and families that are affected by the tragic disease of HIV/AIDS, and I'm pleased it's a priority for our committee. I also favor passage of the Satellite Home Viewer Reauthorization Act, and I plan to offer an amendment that I'll discuss in greater detail when I offer it. I've worked with industry representatives as well as our colleague, Ms. DeGette, to forge an agreement to the Dish PBS stalemate on the carriage of local PBS HDTV signals. I don't think we can wait another 3 years or more for Dish to provide publicly funded programming to its 14 million customers. The discrimination against non-commercial HDTV signals really must end with the, in my view, with the reauthorization of this bill. So thank you again, Chairman Waxman, and I want to thank your staff for working with mine on this matter, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Eshoo. Mr. Terry, you wish to make an opening statement? Thank you. Mr. Stupak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 1 minute, I'd just like to say that we've worked on the Satellite Home Viewer Act. As you know, I want a mandatory date for loco into loco. Late last night, we received a letter that I'd like to make part of the record from Dish Network, in which Dish Network indicate, and I'll quote, will provide local into local service in the remaining unlaunched DMAs no later than 2 years from the date of the statute's enactment. End of quote. We hope that will be the case. I want to hold their feet to the fire. I'm one of those districts that have 2 DMAs that are not covered local into local. While there's been some movement to try to get them covered, we're still not there. And for over 2.2 million Americans, this is unacceptable. So hopefully, with the acceptance of this letter and their commitment, we can get this matter resolved. I'll discuss it more when we get to the Satellite Home Viewer Act, but I want to present this letter for the record.
Without objection, the letter will be admitted to the record. Ms. Blackburn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for the markup. I have a full statement that I will submit, but briefly I just wanted to say thank you and recognize the hard work that our staff and the committee have done to fix the short market and the grade B bleed issue that affects the Jackson, Tennessee DMA. Addressing the unserved component of that will allow some of my constituents in rural West Tennessee, counties like Hardeman and McNairy and Hardin and Chester, to receive those distant satellite signals. As you all know, for us, this is a public safety issue. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Boucher, Ranking Member Stearns, Ranking Member Barton, for the hard work on this and for continuing to work with us on the issue, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent my full statement be placed in the record. One, I support all 4 bills. I'm going to focus only on 2, the Public Safety and Interoperability Communication Grant Program Extension. And I'd like to thank our colleague, Jane Harmon, for working on this legislation. I'd also like to place into the record a letter from our Mayor, Bill White of Houston, talking about how important the Grant Program Extension Act is. And with unanimous consent, I'd like to place it into the record.
Without objection, that'll be the order.
The next bill I'd like to touch on is the reauthorization of Ryan White, how important that is not only to the nation, but again to states like Texas that are growing with HIV/AIDS patients, and hopefully someday we'll have a permanent fix. But more than half the Americans living with AIDS live in 5 states, New York, California, Florida, New Jersey, and Texas. And in the Houston area, we're the 8th largest metropolitan area with 10,000 individuals with AIDS. So Ryan White is important to our Harris County Hospital District, but also to our health departments and our community. And I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Gingrey.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for calling the markup today on the 4 bills that have gone through regular order in the Subcommittees of Communications, Technology, and the Internet, as well as Health. I appreciate the bipartisan spirit in each of these bills that will be considered today, and hope we can extend that sense of comity to all of our work on the committee. H.R. 2994, the Satellite Home Viewer Reauthorization Act, has been the most scrutinized of these 4 bills before the committee today. I'm pleased to see that the amendment in the nature of substitute reflects the work and the input of both sides of the aisle. I believe that the amendment will maintain the integrity afforded to local broadcasters to generate advertising revenue while codifying existing retransmission laws. Mr. Chairman, in addition to 2 other bills from CT&I Subcommittee, H.R. 1147 and H.R. 3633, that were reported unanimously, we will be considering legislation considered by the Health Subcommittee just yesterday. While I support H.R. 3792, the Ryan White HIV/AIDS Treatment Extension Act, I do have concerns regarding the whole harmless policy where states continue to receive funds for patients they no longer have. I sincerely believe that we need to ensure, for the sake of the patients, that these funds follow them instead of being tied to a region. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gingrey. Okay. Then we will go to who seeks recognition on the Democratic side? Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Though I am no longer or not currently a member of the Telecom Subcommittee, I am passionately interested in the subject of this markup, and especially in the so-called PSIC legislation, and I appreciate your involvement in letting me take a lead role on that legislation. Our colleagues should know that it passed the Senate in identical form last night by unanimous consent, so we're well on the way to extending a very important grant program. I will comment when the legislation is brought up, but I did also want to say that I very much appreciate the bipartisan supportive comments in this committee for the legislation and for the sponsor of the legislation. It means a lot, and it was ironic and wonderful to actually chair a portion of the subcommittee hearing on the bill, even though I'm no longer on the subcommittee. So I thank Mr. Boucher and yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Harmon. Mr. Doyle, did you wish to be recognized? Okay. Ms. Schakowsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I support all the bills, but I want to focus on 2, the H.R. 1147, the Local Community Radio Act, and H.R. 3792, the Ryan White Care Act. I'm a co-sponsor of 1147, a bill that will ensure that local priorities and diverse voices get on the airwaves through the use of low-power FM. I'm also an original co-sponsor of the Ryan White Care Act, which has been invaluable to the people of Illinois. Our state receives over $75 million in Ryan White funding, and we need to pass this bill to continue the wide range of support services provided through the legislation. I want to also thank the HIV/AIDS community nationally, in Illinois and in Chicago, including the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, for being a tireless advocate and unwavering resource for me and the 44,000 people living with HIV/AIDS in the state. We literally could not have accomplished this bill and other important piece of legislation like comprehensive health reform without their activism and community organizing. And I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez? You would? Okay. Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for convening this markup today. Also, let me thank the other members of the committee who have worked so hard on these 4 bills, as well as their staffs. I intend to vote for each. But let me speak briefly to the Ryan White Care Act, H.R. 3792. It is correct, Mr. Chairman, that we are making progress in addressing this very dreaded disease. But we must stay focused, and we must continue to invest in treatment so that the lives of Americans can be saved and their quality of life can be enhanced. Among the top 10 counties with incidents of HIV/AIDS in my state, 4 of those 10 are in my congressional district. Though we are facing enormous fiscal challenges, this disease deserves federal intervention, and reauthorization of Ryan White is absolutely necessary. And so I commend all of my colleagues, both Democrat and Republican, for their bipartisan work on this very important bill. Thank you. I yield back. Good work.
Thank you, Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Barrow? Waive opening statements. Ms. Matsui? Ms. Castor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening today's markup. I'm pleased that we're moving forward on several important bills, particularly the Ryan White HIV/AIDS Treatment Extension Act. Last month, I shared the stories of 2 Floridians who benefit from the Ryan White Initiative, and today I'd like to share another story relayed to me from a woman named Diane. She says that I have been receiving medical and case management treatment through Ryan White for over 3 years. Due to my substantially low income, I can't even fathom the idea of being able to afford proper health care. The Ryan White program has been a blessing to me and has given me a second chance to live a proactive life. If the program ceased to exist, I wouldn't know what to do. Even worse, the insurance my employer provides would cover absolutely nothing. I would be left with the complicated decision of choosing between life-saving medical treatment or keeping a roof over my head. Unfortunately, I would have to choose the latter and have my life shortened significantly. Please reinstate the Ryan White program. Not only does my life depend on it, but so do countless others. Mr. Chairman, the Ryan White Initiative is the only true health care safety net for many people living with HIV/AIDS in America. Due to our actions, nonprofit agencies will now be able to continue their important work, and hundreds of thousands of Americans will benefit. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Castor. Mr. Space?
Waive opening, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McNerney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to waive my statement.
Ms. Sutton?
I will waive my statement.
Mr. Welch? Does any member wish to make an opening statement? Ms. Baldwin, you've just arrived. Do you want to make an opening statement? You waive your opening statement. In that case, we'll proceed to H.R. 2994, the Satellite Home Viewer Reauthorization Act. The version before the committee is H.R. 2994 as amended by the Subcommittee on Communications, Technology, and the Internet. Clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 2994 as amended by the Subcommittee on Communications, Technology, and the Internet on June 25, 2009. Section 1.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read, and the Chair would like to now recognize Mr. Barton to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you very much.
That amendment, I assume, is at the desk. The clerk will report it.
Yes.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2994 offered by Mr.
Without objection, that amendment will be considered as read, and Mr. Boucher is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is a manager's amendment in the nature of a substitute, which I'm pleased to offer this morning on behalf of you, Mr. Waxman, and also Mr. Stearns from Florida. It is a bipartisan amendment. Let me just briefly describe the major provisions that the substitute contains. It inserts a provision that Mr. Stearns had suggested to us, that the FCC be directed to complete a study of whether the standard for determining the ability of homes to receive a television signal that contains a network signal from a local affiliate of that network by means of an over-the-air reception be based, as it is today, on using an antenna that is 30 feet in height, which is a little unusual for homes to have. One questions whether those are even routinely manufactured at the present time, or whether perhaps some other standard for the structure of the antenna and the height of the antenna should be accepted. Another provision makes conforming amendments that would prevent time shifting through the importation of a distant network signal from an earlier time zone. That's a provision of current law. We simply retain that going forward. Another provision contains the implementing requirements that are necessary for the commitment that EchoStar has made in order to uplink all 210 local television markets nationwide. And essentially that implementing provision is that EchoStar be permitted to import distant network signals in order to fill what we call short markets. These are local television markets that do not have a full complement of all of the network affiliates. And under this provision, EchoStar could import the distant network signal where that particular signal is missing in the local market so that a full complement of local stations and network signals can be uplinked. EchoStar, under current law, cannot perform that distant network signal importation. The amendment contains a provision that states that nothing in the law will be required, to be construed to require must carry for multicast signals. With the digital television transition, local television stations now have multiple streams of broadcast, their primary signal, and 3 or 4 additional streams that we call multicast signals. And that is a rich array of alternative entertainment. In some cases, they're carrying missing network affiliates and filling the gaps in short markets through these multicast streams. And we have a provision that simply says that nothing in this enactment shall be construed to require must carry of multicast signals. We have another provision reaffirming that nothing in the Act stands in the way of private negotiation for the retransmission of programming. Another provision requires that the Federal Communications Commission issue a report to the Congress concerning the number of households that receive local broadcast stations from a station that is licensed in another state. That report would also have to state the extent to which consumers have access to in-state television programming and whether alternatives exist to the current system by which determinations are generally made with regard to local markets. That is known as the DMA model, and we're asking whether or not a different arrangement would be sensible for us to adopt as a way to encourage the provision of more in-state programming for television viewers. And I want to credit Mr. Ross and also Mr. Deal for their advocacy of in-state television programming and for bringing this study recommendation to us. Finally, we have a provision that ensures that television viewers will not lose distant network signals until such time as they receive network signals delivered by uplinking the local affiliates that are present in that market. Those are the essential provisions contained in the manager's amendment, and I urge its adoption. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Boucher.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, gentlemen
Who seeks recognition on this amendment? Mr. Walden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if the gentleman for Virginia would yield to a question.
I'd be happy to.
Regarding the study on different types of antennas, page 12 of your amendment, lines B and line 17, where you talk about taking into account the types of antennas that are available to and used by consumers, and then go into study considerations on the next page, and whether or not they can be mounted on the roof or placed in a home or fixed or capable of rotating. I'm assuming that your intent here is not to go with the least possible receiving capable antenna. In other words, the one that gets put inside a concrete building, apartment building or something. But we'll look at a range of them, and that the report and study would not make a determination that, yeah, you can't receive it if you have this lesser antenna inside, but you could on the roof, but because you can get one inside, therefore you now can get distant signal. Is that?
Would the gentleman, well.
Absolutely, sir.
Yes, let me respond that the gentleman is absolutely correct. We intend for the Commission to look at the broad range of antennas that are commonly used by television viewers at the present time. When we first wrote this law in 1988, it was much more common than it is today for people to have outdoor antennas that literally were 30 feet in height.
Right.
And today that's far less common. Antennas tend to be somewhat more capable today than they were then. So smaller kinds of antennas can receive signals than was generally the case more than 20 years ago. And the consequence is, as Mr. Stearns has recommended, and he brought this recommendation to us, we ought to ask the Commission to provide more current information so that perhaps the next time we authorize this measure, or even through some interim amendments in the time before the expiration of this statute, we might be able to better reflect the broad range of antennas currently in use today.
And I understand that, and I don't have a problem with that. What I want to make sure, though, is I know from my own experience, moving an antenna a few inches in some cases and some frequencies, moving it inside versus outside, can make a huge difference in reception, how you turn it, everything else. And what I don't want to end up happening is for the Commission to go and determine that you can have the you can make this decision on whether or not you get out-of-market signals based on the antenna that's least able to receive inside, as opposed to one you could put on the roof and get the local signal.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Yes. The concern the gentleman has expressed, I share, and the Commission certainly, in my view, should not base its recommendations to us on the antenna, which is the smallest and the least capable to receive. The broad range of antennas should be encompassed within these recommendations.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your comments.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Green.
I ask unanimous consent. For 5 minutes, right the last word. I want to follow up on our colleague from Oregon and express concerns about language in the management on the FCC study for the designated market area system. It appears the language directs the Commission to reach a preordained conclusion regarding the need to get rid of DMAs in favor of unproven and possibly harmful alternatives. The committee has always been fairly neutral and directs the FCC to study on any issue. But the present language seeks no information about the value of DMAs to the consumers or local broadcasters, nor does it instruct the FCC to look at whether there's actually a benefit in some cases when people receive their local programming from nearby TV stations, even if those stations are located in another state. Rick, if you would yield, and hopefully between now and the floor we'll be able to deal with the language, both to address what our colleague from Oregon, but to make sure that the study is going to be a fair study and we don't preordain the conclusions that the FCC would do.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be glad to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. Let me just comment in making 2 points. First, we're only requesting a study and a report to the Congress. It has no self-executing quality. We're not directing the Commission to undertake any kind of rulemaking on this. I think we need current information about whether or not a better means exists to address the concerns of what we call straddle markets. And these are television markets that receive television programming from various states. Oftentimes you have people in the on the orphan side of that market, meaning a state that is the smaller part of the overall market, where people are receiving the great bulk, if not all, of their television programming from the adjacent state, the market that is primarily based in that state. And the consequence is, as that dominant market area scenario is applied to satellite carriage, it's simply not possible for people to get carriage by satellite of television signals that originate in their state. They're getting it from the state next door. Mr. Ross and Mr. Deal have been very explicit about their concerns on this, and their concerns that in major part I share, and I think other members do as well. We need a system that is fair to all parties concerned, fair to the television viewers in both states that are part of that market, fair to the broadcasters wherever they're situated. The goal is not to disrupt the business model of those broadcasters based on serving their current viewers and hopefully over time expanding their viewership as they offer new and innovative programming on their multicast streams, but to also see if there is some way that we here with subsequent enactments could value to a greater extent the ability of viewers to get in-state television programming. That programming is much more relevant to those viewers in many instances than the programming they're getting from another state. And so we're not trying to dictate a result, and I really differ with the gentleman's suggestion that that is the effect. We're simply trying to get the most current information about other possible scenarios that could honor the needs of all of the interested parties. But having said that, let me also say that I very much will look forward to talking with the gentleman and getting his ideas about how we might modify that language if he is concerned that in some respect we may be trying to dictate a result.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stearns.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to rise in support of the manager's amendment Mr. Boucher is offering. I think, as he pointed out, it's a bipartisan support. Mr. Boucher and my staff, his staff, have worked out with members to try and reach across the aisle and solve some of these problems. And I appreciate Mr. Boucher putting in the study for me dealing with signal strength and antenna standards for determining eligibility for distant signals that should be modified in light of the digital transition. I also believe the manager's amendment clarifies that the conditions in the Communications Act restricting use of compulsory licenses do not apply to individually negotiated deals struck without the use of compulsory licenses. This is important because we want to encourage as much as possible voluntary private sector negotiations among content owners, broadcasters, and satellite operators. I think all of us realize that if you have to put up money, your own money, to run your business and make the thing work, you should have the ability to encourage voluntary negotiation and private sector negotiations on what your content's going to be. And so I urge my colleagues to support the manager's amendment.
Further, Mr. Stupak.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Stupak.
Amendment offered by Mr. Stupak of Michigan. At the end of the bill, add the following new section.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said earlier, 2.2 million households are without access to their local channels when they subscribe to satellite service. Americans in these households reside in rural areas and are dependent on satellite for access to their local news, emergency broadcasts, local sports, and weather. As part of the 1999 Satellite Home Viewer Reauthorization Act, we authorized satellite carriers to retransmit local broadcasts in the local markets on a discretionary basis. In 1999, we also required that the satellite industry, through Section 338 of the Communications Act, to carry one, carry all, if they elected to use Section 122 of the Copyright Act to gain a compulsory license for local broadcasts. Meaning if they choose to utilize a privilege provided by the government, a free copyright, if you will, then they would be required to follow Section 338 obligations and could not discriminate against the small stations by opting to carry only to the large stations in the local market. Satellite companies could simply choose to negotiate directly with the content providers and pay royalties, much like broadcasters do today, and be completely free of all carriage requirements in Section 338. That is exactly what the U.S. Court of Appeals determined when siding against the satellite industry when they sued the government when we first created Carry One, Carry All under Section 338. To quote what the court said, satellite carriage obligations are not triggered simply by the decision to carry a local broadcast station in a given market. Instead, they are triggered by the decision to carry that station by making use of the Section 122 license. A satellite carrier that privately negotiates the required copyright clearances can retransmit the signal of a local broadcast station without incurring any carriage obligations. The court also stated, quote, "The burdens of the rule do not depend on the satellite carrier's choice of content, but on its decision to transmit that content by using one set of economic arrangements rather than the other. That's how Carry One, Carry All is structured." My amendment simply expands Section 338 Carry One, Carry All requirements to become Carry One market and then Carry All markets through a date certain but retains this voluntary choice structure. The Section 122 license should no longer be used by the satellite industry to discriminate against the remaining unserved rural markets while simultaneously receiving a government-provided benefit. My proposed amendment is actually weaker than what Congress passed in the 2008 satellite reauthorization when we mandated carriage for the Alaska and Hawaii markets, which contain a combined TV population of only 600,000. In fact, the satellite companies' quarterly revenues, despite Hawaii and Alaska mandate, have doubled from $4 billion in 2004 to $8 billion in the fourth quarter of 2008. So I would hope that members of the committee recognize that this is no longer a fledgling industry unable to take on the public interest obligations I'm advocating. Now, my proposed amendment represents only one of many paths forward on this important issue. Chairman Boucher and his staff and Ernest Falcon from my staff have all worked tirelessly to craft an alternative path to local and to local for all 210 DMAs. I want to thank them for their hard work. The bill before us represents a voluntary incentives-based model that would remove DISH network to carry local and to local in all 210 markets. I have my reservations about utilizing a voluntary approach, but recently DISH has committed in a letter to the committee that they will reach 210 no later than 2 years, which I am happy to submit this letter for the record. That being said, I will withdraw my amendment despite my reservations on the grounds that this good faith negotiated agreement between the DISH network, the broadcasters, and this committee will ultimately achieve the goal of national, local, and the local that I've advocated for many years. But I want to warn the satellite industry that should the voluntary agreement that's been crafted by this committee turn out to be an empty gesture, I will not be so generous the next time we discuss reauthorization. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd yield back and ask for permission to withdraw my amendment.
Gentleman does not need permission to withdraw his amendment, but the gentleman, therefore, withdraws his amendment. Further discussion of the manager's amendment or amendments thereto? Ms. Escher, for what purpose do you seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Escher of California. At the
Without
end of
objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm offering this amendment to finally end DISH Network's discrimination against non-commercial high-definition signals. The premise of my amendment is simple. 1, it requires satellite carriers to provide their customers with local, non-commercial HD TV transmissions when carrying other local broadcast HD signals. 2, it provides for carriage compliance for 50% of the stations by the end of 2010, with an extra year for the remainder, thus accelerating the FCC 2013 date. Number 3, it enables that when a new service is initiated, non-commercial stations get equal treatment. And it gives carriers one last opportunity to sign a carriage contract because anyone who has one has a safe harbor from the language contained in this amendment. Most importantly, the language not only accelerates the carriage date, it precludes potential waivers of that date extending well into the future. Now, DISH has roughly 14 million subscribers, and they all deserve access to public television's HD signals. DISH gets privileges under this bill, but I think that with those privileges come the responsibility to serve the public interest. My preference would have been that during the past 3 years of negotiations with PBS, that DISH would have decided to serve the public interest and provided equal treatment for non-commercial stations. It's important to note that DirecTV offers HD channels of 106 local public television stations in their local markets. DISH is carrying HD in local commercial broadcasts in 152 markets, covering 93% of U.S. households. But here's the problem. They're only carrying local public television HD broadcasts in Alaska and Hawaii, where they are legally obligated to do so. So I think everyone can appreciate the difference that exists here. Consumers, I think, have the right to view publicly funded programming, and Congress, I think, should act rather than stand in the way of this service. There's been adequate notice of a serious problem, but there's essentially been a failure to act. That's why I'm offering the amendment. I think that we've demonstrated, Mr. Chairman, a great deal of patience and flexibility before offering this amendment. My original bill mandated that Dish carry the multicast signals of the PBS stations as well. So this amendment is actually pared back and is a lighter touch for Dish. I think today is an opportunity for this committee to make a statement on whether or not it will acquiesce to this longstanding discrimination by Dish against PBS, and I hope everyone will join me in ending this practice.
Would gentlelady
Thank
yield?
you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Stations like KCET in Los Angeles are some of the last locally owned and controlled media entities in our country. These public broadcasters provide local communities with high-quality program and services that should be available in high definition. I'm very disappointed that we have to resort to a legislative solution. Dish has been on notice for years that Congress has concerns about the availability of public broadcasting in HD. And I understand there are technical considerations that have to be addressed, but I think these discussions have dragged on for far too long. Under the terms of your amendment, if Dish and Public Television reach an agreement before this bill becomes law, the amendment will not go into effect. But make no mistake, if the parties can't figure out a voluntary solution, Congress, I hope, will act to ensure that households in all markets will receive their local public television HD signals if they are satellite subscribers. And I join you in supporting this amendment.
Gentlelady yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Will the gentlelady yield?
Gentlelady still has time, yes.
Thank you. I just want to thank the gentlelady for working on this amendment. Ms. Eshoo and I have been trying for a long time to convene discussions between Dish and the public broadcasting folks. And I will tell you, these negotiations have been very, very challenging and difficult. There are issues on both sides. I understand Ms. Eshoo's frustration. I'm concerned about whether we could, in fact, make this happen within 3 years. And I'm also concerned that PBS and Dish don't ever seem to negotiate until we're having some kind of legislative action. And so I would really urge the parties to sit down. Mr. Chairman, I'll put in the record my concerns about the specifics because I know we've got a vote on the floor. But I will say I hope that both parties realize now we're serious about this. We want Dish to carry PBS, and we want it to be done in a reasonable way where it can happen. So I thank the gentlelady for working with me on this, and for both parties are trying to negotiate. But we've got to get this situation solved. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady's time has expired. There's a vote on the House floor. I want to inform members that I want to recognize Mr. Stearns if he wishes to speak now. If he does, after he's finished, we will break for the votes.
Thank you,
Mr. Stearns, you're recognized.
I'd like to speak in opposition to the amendment. My colleagues, this is a negotiation between the satellite broadcasters and public broadcasting. Now, one of these entities is a private for-profit corporation. Public broadcasting wants the government to step in and mandate that public broadcasting take their signal. That's what it's all about. Now, the entity, which is the Dish Networks, are for profit. They base their opinions on what consumers want. Have consumers come to them day in and day out, 7 days a week, saying, we want public broadcasting? Obviously not, or the negotiation would have been completed. The entities we're talking about, one is for profit, the other is subsidized by the federal government, up to $600 million a year. That's public broadcasting. Now, it's a wonderful, I watch public broadcasting, and their high definition is quality. But the thing is, we're talking about the market. The question, should the United States government step in and force a private company to carry the signal of a subsidized public broadcasting? And I don't think they should. This is a consumer-oriented decision that the Dish Network should make based upon how they're going to make money so they can pay their stockholders, develop enough profit so they can innovate and stay ahead of the curve so they can compete with the cable companies. So I think we should allow them to continue to negotiate, because what is public broadcasting going to do if the Eshoo amendment passes? They're going to do nothing and wait till 2011 when the government will step in and force the dish networks to take public broadcasting. So I think what we want to say is let's let this play out a while. Let the parties work when they can. But the important thing all of you should realize is if the dish networks are not negotiating quickly, it's because their consumers are not asking, not mandating, not in an overwhelming manner saying, we want to have that. The consumers are saying, you know what, I'd rather have video on demand. I'd like to have movies on demand in high definition, Blu-ray movies. I'd like to have other types of network. So perhaps public broadcasting has to compete with other sources for the consumer's interest. Why don't we let this play out? Eventually, public broadcasting will be carried by the dish networks. We all know that. But in the interim, surely we want the market to work.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be glad to yield if I had more time. I think
you do. I appreciate it. I'd just like to make a couple of points, and I appreciate the points that you've made.
Mr. Chairman, is this still my time?
It's still your time, and there is 3 minutes on the House floor.
Yield to Ms. Escher. I'd like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Barton.
Well, I'm going to speak when we get back. If I just soon yield your yield.
We're going to break for the vote and come back. So if all of you can.
But I'm going to read.
Can I just make my point since Mr. Barton is yielding the time that Mr. Okay, I'll be very quick. Number one, I think it's very important for everyone to understand that the only satellite company that is not carrying the public broadcasting and HDTV is Dish. All the others have agreed. Number two, it is discrimination against our constituents.
Mr. Chairman, I take back my time because I don't believe it's discrimination. Right. And she's speaking on her own time is fine, but on my time, I think.
When the gentleman has concluded his remarks and he still has another minute, we will stand in recess.
Do you want me to?
Go ahead. You have another minute.
Okay. You know, this amendment is simply tipping the scale in favor of the government mandating that a private company has to take their product. Now, you know, when Winn-Dixie started out and when Walmart started out, would you want the government to step in and tell them what they want to do? No. And so if for some reason the Dish Network just say, golly, we just don't want to do it right now, hold off, we'll think about it, because our consumers want an alternative type of demand, why not let them have this? So I think the amendment is unnecessary. We should let the process work, not impose the federal government into this negotiation. In fact, you know, I think for many of us, public broadcasting should no longer need money from the federal government, and it sort of compounds the problem when you're saying this private entity is forced to take a government mandate when the mandate is being forced upon them by a company that gets government funding. So I would encourage my colleagues to vote against the SU amendment.
Glad you're here. The committee will come to order. Chairman Waxman has asked me to stand in for him while he attends to some other business. Pending is the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes to address the amendment. I want to begin by commending Ms. Eshoo for her admirable advocacy of public broadcasting. And I share her admiration for public broadcasting. I am a public broadcasting viewer, and the goal of her amendment is entirely commendable, and I want to thank her for putting it before the committee and bringing to our attention the need to have the public broadcast signals delivered in high definition by both satellite carriers at the earliest possible time. But this morning, because I have some deep reservations about the way the amendment would affect some existing understandings and business models, I reluctantly oppose the amendment. And I want to explain my reasons for that opposition. Under current regulations that are in force at the FCC, satellite carriers are already under an obligation to carry public broadcast stations and other stations in local markets that they're uplinking with local interlocal service in high definition under a schedule that is set forth in the regulation. And under that current requirement and that schedule, by February the 17th of each of the next 4 years, an ever larger number of local television markets that the carriers uplink have to be uplinked in high definition. In February of 2010, 15% of the markets that a carrier uplinks have to be carried in high definition under that existing requirement. The next year, 30% of the local markets that a carrier uplinks, including all of the signals in that market, that includes PBS, would have to be uplinked in high definition. In 2012, 60% of the local markets would have to be uplinked in high definition, and by February the 17th of 2013, all of the markets in the nation that a carrier uplinks would have to be uplinked in high definition. And so by 2013, February of that year, all of the PBS stations, as well as other stations that a carrier uplinks, would have to be carried in high definition under the current law. The amendment that the gentlelady has offered would accelerate that time frame with respect to public broadcasting stations. And my concern is that EchoStar simply cannot achieve the high definition carriage schedule that the amendment would require and still honor the commitment that EchoStar has made to this committee and to the House Judiciary Committee, that within the near term it will uplink all 210 local television markets across the United States. It's a question of whether or not there is adequate satellite capacity in order to honor both of those goals and achieve them both at the same time. A word about the current schedule that EchoStar has for satellite launches is in order. EchoStar has scheduled a new satellite launch for 2010 for next year in order to honor the commitment it has made to uplink all 210 local television markets across the United States and begin carrying those 28 local markets that at the present time do not have local interlocal television service. And then in the fourth quarter of 2012, EchoStar has plans to launch a second new satellite that would meet the obligation that currently is imposed upon it by the Federal Communications Commission to be uplinking in high definition all of the markets that it would be uplinking, and that, of course, would include PBS stations. Now, the company has said it simply cannot, given its satellite capacity limitations and the planned launch schedule, meet the high definition requirements that are contained in the amendment for PBS stations and also honor the commitment that it's made to the committee, that if it gets the right to import distant network signals to fill the gaps in short markets, that it will uplink all 210 local television markets in the near term. And that's the reason that I oppose this amendment. I want to make just a couple of additional points. EchoStar covers at the present time with local and to local service 181 markets. DirecTV covers 152. And the business plans of these two companies are somewhat different. Their business strategies are different. DirecTV beams more high-definition programming and covers with that signal quality a large number of subscribers in the market it serves. EchoStar has opted for breadth and is covering with standard definition a far larger number of local markets and has now committed to us that it will go all the way to 210 local markets, covering the 28 that are not covered at the present time. But much of that coverage, of necessity, is going to be in standard definition television. EchoStar is today the single largest distributor among all of the multi-channel distributors of public broadcasting television. EchoStar carries more public broadcasting than any cable system and more public broadcasting than its competitor in the satellite TV space. It is the largest distributor today of PBS programs. And when it uplinks all 210 local television markets, it will be an even larger distributor of public television than it is today. Now, that's a benefit to public television stations because they'll be able to reach more viewers through that new uplinking opportunity, and that, of course, enhances their fundraising and other things. And so I am just concerned that that if this amendment is adopted, it will upset the very carefully negotiated agreement that we have that would have EchoStar in the near term uplink all 210 local television markets. My time has expired, and at this time I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, for 5 minutes to speak on the amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me echo your comments at the beginning of your remarks in terms of your respect and affection for the author of the amendment, Congresswoman Eshoo. I have the utmost respect and go out of my way to try to be supportive when she offers amendments. I am opposed to this amendment, and I'm opposed to it very strongly. My opposition is based on a different approach than yours, Mr. Chairman. You were very eloquent in your practical explanation of the situation with EchoStar and the number of markets served and their timetable and their commitment and things like that. My opposition is philosophical. We have a mandate that public television stations be carried by satellites and by our broadcasters. I don't have a problem with that because of the word public television. There is in current law or regulation a requirement, as you pointed out, that about 2013 those stations be carried in high definition. But high definition is a qualitative standard. It's not an absolute minimum service standard. And as you pointed out, some of our satellite companies have responded more aggressively or to the market for high definition and public broadcasting than others. And to me, that's acceptable and appropriate because they're private. So the Eshoo amendment before us is making the argument that there has to be a qualitative standard applied, and it has to be applied sooner. And I think that's a mistake. If one satellite provider wants to do it one way and another wants to do it another way, and those that want to view public broadcasting over satellite, they have a choice. They can, by the choices they make in the marketplace, they can decide which satellite service to use and to pay for. We should let consumers in the market make that choice. Now, admittedly, this is a minor, it's a 3-year differential. I mean, this is not the sun's going to rise in the east and set in the west type of a debate. It's a qualitative debate, and it's a debate at the margin. We're all going to support the reauthorization of the Satellite Home Viewers Act when it comes to final passage. And I don't think any of us are going to lose any sleep tonight, depending on how this vote on the Eshoo amendment comes out. You know, she's to be commended for strongly supporting the position that she has. But I think people like myself should be commended for standing on a basic principle that when it's at all possible, we should let the market operate. And I don't see that the Republic is going to be at fault if different satellite providers have different timetables for providing high-definition service on their satellites. It would be like if we had a mandate that everybody has to have a telephone, and then we came back and mandated that it has to be a specific iPhone or some specific high-end BlackBerry or something like that. It's just not necessary. So, again, I have super respect for Ms. Eshoo, and but in this case, I'm going to strongly urge the members of the full committee to vote against her amendment, and strongly encourage the members on the minority side to vote against the amendment.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from California has spoken on the amendment.
Did I use up all my time?
I had a minute and 13.
Someone else will yield.
The gentleman from Texas will yield to you the balance of his 1 minute, 13 seconds.
13 seconds.
Yes, the gentlelady from California is recognized under that.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the ranking member. I just want to make a few points on this. It's clear that DISH can do more than they're now required, and whatever the current understandings are, they've actually shown in the course of negotiations, Mr. Chairman, that they're amenable to accelerating their rollout of public stations in HD. But in exchange for that, they've demanded other concessions that are unrelated and unacceptable to the public stations. So they can clearly do more than they're saying, and they should not be allowed to benefit from, I think, what, even though it's offensive to some people to hear this, it's really discriminatory behavior. Furthermore, there's no guarantee that they will in fact comply with the 2013 deadline. They've asked for waivers before and are likely to again. So what I want to remind members of is if in fact the negotiations between PBS and DISH continue and they come up with an agreement, this amendment melts away. But for every single member of the committee, these are publicly funded programs on public airwaves, and I think to have that kind of denial, with the exception of the state of Alaska and Hawaii, is really not the best we can do in our country for our constituents. That's the motivation for the amendment. As I said, we pared it back, and they have plenty of time to do it. I believe that their business plan can accommodate it. And most frankly, I don't think it's upsetting to what Chairman Boucher just described in terms of understanding with others. This is the only satellite outfit that is not doing what we've described previously this morning. So I thank the gentleman for yielding time to me, and I hope members will see the benefit of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eshoo. The gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I won't use it all, so if someone on our side wants more time, I'd be happy to give it. But the DISH network is carrying HD local commercial broadcasts in 152 markets, covering 93% of U.S. households. However, DISH is only carrying local public television HD broadcasts in Alaska and Hawaii, which it is legally obligated to do. So in effect, DISH is skewing the viewing public against local public television stations at the same time that the public and Congress is funding these stations. In fact, DISH is continuing this practice of discrimination even today. DISH has recently added HD carriage to Columbus, Tupelo, Mississippi, South Bend, Indiana, Fort Wayne, Indiana, La Crosse, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, Panama City, Florida, Wausau, Rhinelander, Wisconsin, all without bringing a single local public television HD signal. Since November of 2007, the DISH has expanded its carriage of local HD signals from 30 markets to 152 markets without picking up a single public television station. So it seems to me, since Congress does have an interest in public television, that the discrimination is clear, the capacity is clear, and that we should support the SU amendment.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I'd be happy to. I saw Bart with his hand up. Maybe he can use part of that time.
Sure. Well, thanks. I'll just be a minute or two. I want to support the SU amendment. Satellite dish network is already broadcasting high definition in most of these local markets, but not necessarily for the public broadcasting channels. So that means, and so if you take a look at it, they're already doing a high def. They're just not doing the public broadcasting channels. And as Ms. Schakowsky said, they already have the infrastructure. The spot beam infrastructure is in place. They have the capacity. So this is really a debate on whether we as a committee believe that ensuring public broadcasters is on the same level field as private broadcasters in the public interest. So it's really a public interest. We're going to treat them differently as private broadcasting. We're going to treat it the same. The capacity is there. The infrastructure is there. There's no reason why we have to do it. Plus, look, what we're saying is after 3 years of negotiations, we've got nowhere. Work this out before this becomes law. If you don't, then the SU amendment takes effect. We're giving you one last chance to work it out. We should be able to do it. Let's get this done. Let's use the SU amendment to keep a little pressure on them. I'd yield to Mr. Engel. Oh, I can't. Ms. Schakowsky, would you yield to Mr. Engel for some time?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I thank my colleagues from Illinois and Michigan for yielding to me. I support the SU amendment. I just know in my own family, I have 3 kids. They're grown, but all of them were brought up watching educational programming on my local public broadcasting station. Between Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Reading Rainbow, all these other great things, public broadcasting stations offer a great number of programs for kids. And when these kids grow up, they're able to watch the high-quality news, cultural, and documentary broadcasts on these same stations. As many people in this room know, I'm a huge baseball fan, and I have to say the Ken Burns documentary on baseball is one of the best shows I've ever seen on television. But right now, as our colleagues have mentioned, PBS stations are at a huge disadvantage with satellite customers. In almost all markets across the country, while satellite customers are enjoying the great benefits of high-definition commercial broadcasts, satellite companies have chosen not to broadcast PBS in HD. And it's a massive disservice to Americans who want to see high-quality programming the way it was meant to be seen. We are in the 21st century. We ought to act that way, and I strongly support Ms. Eshu's amendment, and I yield back to Ms. Schakowsky.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schakowsky. Does any other member seek recognition to speak on the amendment? The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't use all my 5 minutes, and I can yield to members on our side that may wish our time. I lament the fact that we weren't aware of this issue, I guess, as we went through the hearing and subcommittee and the markup as well. And for one, I am a very strong supporter of public broadcasting. As consumers know across the country, and I was there in Las Vegas a few years ago when we saw the first demonstration of HD and knew what it could do and what it could provide. And it's been a remarkable ride for those folks as they brought that technology into the homes. And people vote with their feet as to whether or not they have subscribed to these services. I know in my neighborhood here in D.C., Fios is one of the systems that you see a lot offered by Verizon. And the first call that I had to Verizon to see if I wanted to switch over was, what service do you provide in HD? The answer was none. Not a single program in my neighborhood here do they provide in HD. Well, end of conversation. Don't need to think about going to Fios because Comcast provides HD, and I'm going to stay with that service. That is the same as we look across America. As people experience HD, they get to decide what they're going to watch. You should let the consumer decide. You shouldn't have a mandate, particularly one that mandate is probably going to elevate costs, but you also have to ask, what else is it going to take away from? It's my understanding that there are 28 markets nationwide. I'm sorry, by the way, to trash Fios in my neighborhood. Maybe they'll listen. I don't know. But there are 28 markets nationwide that do not provide service for public broadcasting. And it's my understanding that those markets, mainly in rural areas, I don't know where they are, whether they be in Michigan or other states, I've asked the staff to try and find out for me, that will not get public broadcasting at all if they're required to have this in terms of local to local. So you're going to be telling some folks who won't, in essence, will not have a chance for a long time because of the mandate that would have provided. But I guess what I'm lamenting is the fact that it wasn't until this morning that I knew about this amendment. I wish that we had had an opportunity, and again, maybe it was when I wasn't in attendance at the hearing or in the markup that we had before the subcommittee, and perhaps we would have been able to use that time in between to try and broker a deal or see outside pressure bring about an agreement so that, in fact, you could see it versus a legislative mandate. And I look to my members on my side if any of them want time. I yield to Mr. Stearns, the ranking member of the subcommittee.
I thank my colleague. I would like to do a colloquy with the chairman, Mr. Boucher, if I could, on this subject. You'd mentioned a little bit about the technical aspect about this. As I understand it, that if the Dish network was forced to do this, they don't have the broadband right now, so that there be 28 unserved areas would no longer get commercial TV. So they would not get the digital standard because they don't have the broadband today, and so forcing this means that there be 28 unserved areas in this country, broad swath of communities, mostly I assume rural communities, would no longer get digital selection. You might just amplify on that.
Well, will the gentleman yield to me? Yes. There are 28 local television markets across the nation that today do not have what we call local-into-local television service. That means that neither one of the two major satellite carriers are uplinking the local television stations in those markets and beaming them back into that market for reception by television viewers locally there. What Dish Network, EchoStar, has committed to do, if provisions in this bill that we have in the manager's amendment become law, is uplink all of those currently 28 unserved markets within the near term and provide television service to local viewers in those markets. And EchoStar has scheduled a launch of a new satellite for next year in order to meet that obligation and to serve these 28 local markets. EchoStar simply does not have the satellite capacity that is necessary and will not, under its current launch schedule, to do that and provide that 28 market local service and at the same time meet the requirements that would be imposed under Ms. Eshu's amendment, whereby the PBS stations nationwide would have to be carried in high definition. The capacity to do both simply doesn't exist. And the concern I expressed earlier, which I will offer in answer to the gentleman's question, is that I am troubled by the fact that this amendment, if it becomes law, could upset the very carefully negotiated arrangement that we have worked out over the last number of months that is embedded within the manager's amendment that would result in these 28 local markets being served. That's my concern, and I thank the gentleman for yielding to me. Does any other member seek recognition to speak on the amendment? The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Stupak,
right on my own time,
is recognized for 5 minutes.
Last word. I'd yield to Ms. Eshu.
I thank the gentleman from Michigan. First, to my friend, Mr. Upton, I really can't allow it to stand in the record that this is a surprise today. I introduced the legislation almost 3 years ago, circulated the bill to every single member, both sides of the aisle, of this entire committee, as well as other members of the House. I have raised the issue at every single hearing that the subcommittee has had. Let me just finish. So maybe you weren't at some of the subcommittee hearings, but in all sincerity, I mean, I have worked hard on the bill, not only to share it with members, but to raise the issues that concerned me most and brought me to offering the legislation. Most recently, in a hearing in 23, 22, or whatever room we're in upstairs, where I questioned the general counsel of DISH. So this is pretty well known throughout the committee, I think, and so I just want to correct that. What I think is a real misconception. I also want to add that today, and everyone should understand this, today, not one person in the continental United States has the option of watching PBS in HD, and because of through DISH. Other satellite companies have done this, and with all due respect, I don't believe this is going to upset a business plan. I mean, this is something that can be worked out by the parties, and this amendment will melt away. This is not going to stand in the 22nd century. This is not some fearful, menacing, oh my God, the sky is caving in thing. We're saying to these people, get to the table and get this thing settled so that people across the country will have access to what we know is really valuable programming for people in our country. Every member here knows, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on, the value of PBS. In a time when there is more shouting and more heat rather than light cast on things, public broadcasting is the place that makes the breakthrough, where they bring facts to the American people, and it's up to people to make up their minds, to broaden the intellect and the understanding of our great democracy. So while this may be a small amendment in some ways, I think it represents some pretty big values. So I thank the gentleman for yielding to me, and I yield. Do you want to use the balance?
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stupak. The question now occurs on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The gentlelady from California requests a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Waxman. Mr. Dingle. Mr. Markey. Mr. Boucher.
No.
Mr. Boucher, no. Mr. Pallone.
Yes.
Mr. Pallone votes aye. Mr. Gordon.
Yes.
Mr. Gordon, aye. Mr. Rush. Mr. Rush votes aye. Ms. Eshoo. Ms. Eshoo votes aye. Mr. Stupak.
Yes.
Mr. Stupak, aye. Mr. Engel. Mr. Engel, aye. Mr. Green. Mr. Green, aye. Ms. DeGette. Mrs. Capps. Mrs. Capps, aye. Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle, aye. Ms. Harmon. Ms. Harmon, aye. Ms. Schakowsky. Ms. Schakowsky, aye. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez, aye. Mr. Inslee. Mr. Inslee, aye. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin votes aye. Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross, aye. Mr. Wiener. Mr. Wiener, aye. Mr. Matheson. Mr. Matheson, aye. Mr. Butterfield. Mr. Butterfield, aye. Mr. Melanson. Mr. Barrow. Mr. Barrow votes aye. Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill, no. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui votes aye. Mrs. Christensen. Mrs. Christensen, aye. Ms. Castor. Ms. Castor, aye. Mr. Sarbanes. Mr. Sarbanes, aye. Mr. Murphy of Connecticut. Mr. Murphy, aye. Mr. Space. Mr. Space votes aye. Mr. McNerney. Ms. Sutton. Ms. Sutton, aye. Mr. Braley. Mr. Braley votes aye. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch votes aye. Mr. Barton.
No.
Mr. Barton, no. Mr. Hall. Mr. Upton. No. Mr. Upton, no. Mr. Stearns. Mr. Stearns, no. Mr. Deal. Mr. Deal, no. Mr. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, no. Mr. Shimkus. Mr. Shimkus, no. Mr. Shattuck. Mr. Shattuck, no. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt, no. Mr. Boyer. Mr. Boyer, no. Mr. Radonovich. Mr. Pitts. Mr. Pitts, no. Ms. Bono-Mack. Ms. Bono-Mack, no. Mr. Walden. Mr. Walden, no. Mr. Terry. Mr. Terry, no. Mr. Rogers. Mrs. Myrick. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, no. Mr. Murphy of Pennsylvania. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess votes no. Ms. Blackburn. Ms. Blackburn, no. Mr. Gingrey. Mr. Gingrey, no. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey votes aye. Mr. Dingell. Mr. Dingell votes aye. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney votes aye.
Do any further members desire to be recorded? Chair sees none. The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, the yeas were 31 and the nays were 20.
31 to 20, the amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? The question, therefore, occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute as amended is adopted. The question now occurs on reporting the bill as amended favorably to the House of Representatives. Members in favor will vote aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill as amended is reported with a favorable recommendation. The chair now calls up H.R. 3633, the Public Safety Interoperable Communications Grant Program Extension Act of 2009. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3633, a bill to allow funding for the Interoperable Emergency Communications Grant Program established under the Digital Television Transition and Public Safety Act of 2005 to remain available until expended through fiscal year 2012 and for other purposes.
Does the gentlelady from California, Ms. Harmon, seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman?
Just a moment, Ms. Harmon. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read, and the gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you again personally and to Chairman Waxman also for allowing me to be lead sponsor on this bill, a bill in an area I care passionately about and one where this committee has tried over some years to do good work. As I mentioned in opening remarks, the companion an identical version to this bill introduced in the Senate by Senators Rockefeller and Hutchison was approved on voice vote last night. So assuming we take action today, we are in position to have played a role in what I predict will soon become law and provide enormous relief to our communities. As you know, Mr. Chairman, on 9/11 there were two massive failures. One of them was our failure to connect the dots. The FBI didn't talk to itself. It didn't talk to the CIA. There was information in our government that could have led us to find several of the hijackers on that day and hopefully prevent them and perhaps prevent the whole plot from occurring. But the other major failure was the lack of an interoperable communications network. The NYPD helicopters were circling over the towers, the trade towers, while they were glowing red, and the police department was frantically trying to communicate with the fire department, whose brave firefighters were climbing up the stairs and who had counseled people to remain in place. Obviously, that information was wrong, but the firefighters couldn't receive the signals. This bill continues funding for a life-saving program that enables communities to put in place local and regional interoperability networks. It has the support of every major law enforcement agency and certainly the support of the police chief and the sheriff of Los Angeles County, the largest county in America. It will fix part of the problem. It will give these communities a longer time to get the funding that they absolutely need from the federal government. And that I applaud, and I think every member of this committee is for this. What it won't fix, however, is the urgent need for a national interoperable communications capability. And that will only come when we finally get on with figuring out how to give our first preventers access to the 700 megahertz analog spectrum, which we have cleared off thanks to the DTV transition. That problem is not yet solved. An auction tried by the FCC last year failed, and we've had recent hearings about other options to build out that spectrum, hopefully with forward-leaning technology. I continue to favor a public-private partnership and not just to let us build push-to-talk radio systems in every community in America. But nonetheless, this bill is a critical building block for a national interoperable capability. It is poised to become law, and I'm pleased to introduce it and will be pleased when it comes to the floor soon. I hope to work with Mr. Gao and others on its prompt, bipartisan, hopefully unanimous passage. And I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harmon. The question occurs on the motion to report the bill to the full House with the recommendation that the bill do pass. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is reported. The chair now calls up H.R. 1147, the Local Community Radio Act of 2009. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1147, as amended by the Subcommittee on Communications, Communications Technology, and the Internet on October 8, 2009. Section 1, short title, this act
Without
may be
objection,
cited.
the bill will be considered as read. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, is recognized for 5 minutes to strike the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Chairman Waxman for so strongly supporting this legislation that will bring local communities across this country access to their airwaves. I'm very proud of the support that this bill has from both sides of the aisle, including the bill's lead co-sponsor and my friend Lee Terry, and from many other members of this subcommittee.
Through the creation of LPFM, the Federal Communication Commission sought to create opportunities for new voices on the airwaves and to allow local groups, including schools, churches, and other community-based organizations, to provide programming responsive to local community needs and interests. When Congress passed the Radio Broadcasting Preservation Act in 2000, many of those organizations were prevented from communicating to their members, supporters, and residents on the FM radio dial by what were known as third adjacent protections. Basically, a low-power station has to be more than 3 clicks of the dial on both sides away from a bigger broadcaster. The bill was enacted because some incumbent broadcasters worried about the interference that new low-power FM radio stations might cause that would harm radio listeners across the dial. But thanks to the work of my good friend Chairman Dingell and others, Congress at that time also wisely mandated that an outside study be conducted to evaluate those claims. And Congress demanded that the FCC, our expert agency over the public's airwaves, that they review that outside study, analyze its impact on listeners and incumbent radio broadcasters, and then vote on its conclusions and recommend to us if we should reduce the impact of or eliminate altogether the impact of that law. On a unanimous bipartisan basis, the Federal Communication Commission issued a report to Congress on February 19, 2004, which stated, Congress should readdress this issue and modify the statute to eliminate the third adjacent channel distance separation requirement for LPFM stations. For a second time on November 27, 2007, and for a third time once again last month on September 17, 2009, before the subcommittee, all 5 commissioners agreed that Congress should lift the restrictions on LPFM stations and allow the FCC to license new stations in more communities. Where they're allowed to exist under current law, LPFM stations have proven to be a vital source of information during local or national emergencies. And these stations promote the arts and education from religious organizations, community groups, organizations promoting literacy, and many other civically oriented organizations. But we have to act on the Commission's recommendation. Otherwise, these stations are prevented from operating in communities across America, communities like mine, which are too large to have any slots for new LPFM stations at 4th adjacent, but could fit several at 3rd. But you don't have to take my word for it. Every FCC commissioner since 2003's word for it, or the MITRE Corporation's outside study's word for it. We all know it will work because it already works. Currently, large commercial and non-commercial FM stations duplicate and extend their signal on 2nd and 3rd adjacent channels to full-power radio station using a wattage that's 2.5 times more powerful than the FCC permits LPFMs to use, using the very same transmitters that LPFM stations use. The FCC, based on its LPFM rules on the actual performance of these translators, which already operate without undue interference to FM stations. I want to say that we're proud to have the support of many, many incumbent broadcasters for our legislation. We made changes during the subcommittee's consideration of the bill to resolve concerns from other incumbent broadcasters, and we're especially pleased that National Public Radio expressed its appreciation of these changes. The time has come for Congress to rewrite the law. The time has come to make the airwaves available to the people they serve. The time has come to bring low power to the people. Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, there's one person that I want to recognize. At the subcommittee, I gave credit to the grassroots support and for the many people on staff that have worked hard for this issue. But there's one person, my LD, Kenneth DeGraff, who has worked tirelessly on this issue and deserves to be publicly recognized. I think he's one of the best staffers on the Hill, and I want to publicly thank him for his hard work on this issue. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Doyle. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, is recognized to strike the last word.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Mike Doyle for talking to me about this important issue. I've been a fan of low-power FM or low-power radio and how it can enhance neighborhoods and community groups. And so I appreciated the invite and working together with you the last couple years. We don't have unanimous support for this. We've had opposition from the NAB, and understandably with their concerns with adjacency and interference. We've worked with them, and I think we've done a good job of trying to listen and resolve those. But I think the time has come where we've done about as much as we can. And in balance with the studies as set forth, the MITRE study and others that show that there is little chance for interference at the third adjacency, and then balancing that with how it empowers the communities, neighborhoods, at least in the Omaha area. Gentlemen like Wes Hall, who's very involved in our North Omaha African American community, 100 Black Men of Omaha chapter. These are the type of people, Salem Baptist Church in North Omaha, Hispanic groups that have already contacted my office about how to proceed through the process here. So even though it's low power, it's highly empowering to these community groups. So on balance, I think this is a good thing that's going to elevate the communication, neighborhoods, community groups, and their abilities to communicate to their brethren. So, again, Mike, thank you, and Chairman Boucher, thank you for being supportive, and Chairman Waxman, and allowing it to be brought so quickly this session. Yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Doyle. The question now occurs on reporting the bill to the full committee. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, the ayes have it, and the bill is reported with a favorable recommendation. I'll ask Mr. Pallone, the chairman of the Health Subcommittee, to assume the chair.
Thank you. The chair now calls up H.R. 3792, the Ryan White HIV/AIDS Treatment Extension Act. Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3792.
And without objection, the bill will be considered as read. I'm not aware of any amendments or anybody's interest in commenting on this any further. If anybody feels they need to say something, please tell us. Otherwise, we're going to move the bill to the floor. Okay. I would move that the committee report H.R. 3792 to the full House with the recommendation that the bill pass. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported to the full House. Okay. All right, without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming corrections to all the bills approved today. Before we adjourn, though, we do have to make a change to the previous bill, the local community clarification with regard to the previous bill, H.R. 1147, the Local Community Radio Act of 2009. The bill was reported to the committee rather than to the full House. And so I would basically ask that we move to report H.R. 1147, the Local Community Radio Act of 2009, to the full House with the recommendation that the bill pass. And so we'll have another vote on that. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and that bill, H.R. 1147, is also reported to the full House with the recommendation that the bill pass. Is any other business before the committee today? If not, without objection, the meeting of the committee is adjourned.